Podcasts on UNC-TV.org are made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC-TV.
Is Jim Hunt still the governor of North Carolina? A lot of people think he is, even though it's been almost 10 years since he left office. It's time, perhaps, to put his extraordinary 16 years as governor in context, as history. And this is what Gary Pearce, Governor Hunt's longtime political confidant and advisor, sets out to do in his new book, Jim Hunt, A Biography. We'll talk to Gary Pearce about Governor Hunt and the new book, all this on North Carolina Bookwatch, next.
Funding for North Carolina Bookwatch is made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC-TV, and by the Mary Duke Biddle Foundation, Quail Ridge Books and Music, and the North Carolina Humanities Council.
Welcome to North Carolina Bookwatch. I'm D.G. Martin. My guest is Gary Pearce, who's the author of Jim Hunt, a biography. Gary, welcome.
Thank you, D.G. Thanks for having me.
Well, since 1976, I think, since when you left your career in journalism, you've been associated in one form or another with Governor Hunt, his political operations. You helped him in government. You stuck together when he's in office and out of office. A lot of people who follow politics have admired the length as well as the depth of your friendship and your political partnership. Now, how did all this give you the background and the audacity to write someone so complicated, so accomplished, and so much to him, to bring all this together in a book?
Well, I guess because I was there for most of it. I took the job. I went to work for his first campaign for governor, January 1st, 1976. I took it as a one-year job. I'd been at the News and Observer, and I was sort of tired of being in journalism, and I wanted to try something different. And he offered me a job, his campaign. I figured, well, it'd work out good, could be fun for a year. And here I am, however many years later it is, and I'm still working for him. Once you work for Jim Hunt, you never escape it.
Everybody who, well, almost everybody, there's some exceptions, maybe we'll talk about them. Everybody who starts to work with him seems to maintain some kind of relationship, even though it may change almost for a lifetime. That Jim Hunt's got maybe not a Rolodex anymore, but he's got a long list of people that he can call on almost any problem.
Well, he does, and he's accumulated a lot of people over history. It's sort of interesting. This fall is the 50th anniversary of the election of Terry Sanford and John Kennedy in 1960, and that was Hunt's first campaign. He organized colleges for Terry Sanford and for Kennedy. So 50 years he's been in politics. Before that, he was in campus politics at North Carolina State. And he has kept with him over all those years are sort of like geological layers of people who are just drawn to him, interested in working with him. And he's sort of still out there doing it, even today.
Well, we want to talk about some of those accomplishments. I'd like to be sure that we don't neglect to do it, to talk about some of Jim Hunt's growing up, his parents, some of his teachers. In reading your book, you seem to stress some of the importance of his early days in terms of what it made him later in life. And can you describe what Jim Hunt's growing up was like?
Well, I can. And in the book, I've really tried to tell the book as a story. The real story to me is, how does somebody come from a farm boy in eastern North Carolina with no wealth, no big political name, and become a four-time governor? Really come out of nowhere. And at the same time, how did North Carolina change? How did he impact that change? How did it impact him? And the fundamental thing about Hunt, he's very much a product of his time. He was born in the 30s. He is not a baby boomer. He's older than the baby boomers. He remembers World War II. He grew up on a farm. But his parents were different from most farmers. They both had college degrees. They were very socially conscious, very politically conscious. His real first political hero was Governor Carr Scott. One of the stories told many times, not just in my book, is that the first time Hunt began to see what politics can do is when Carr Scott paved the dirt road front of his house. Now, Car Scott didn't personally pave it, but to listen to Hunt tell it, you'd about think that he did. And it gave him a sense that politics can make a difference. And he had a very strong sense, and I think really keeps it to this day, that there are some people who, because of where they're born, the background they're born in, the color of their skin, don't have the advantages that a lot of other people do. And that is the motivating, driving force behind him throughout his career in politics.
I was taken, when I was a little boy, I didn't live in the country, but I lived in the country where there were country schools, and so one of the things that we had to take was agriculture, and became members of the Future Farmers of America and learned some things, at least peripherally, but I didn't take to it as well as Jim Hunt did. The Future Farmers of America and some of the teachers in agriculture were important to Governor Hunt.
Oh, FFA was a big deal. That's probably how he got his start in politics. One of his friends, Phil Carlton, explained it. He said, look, when you grow up in the country, it's not like in the city. He said the city boys had plenty of things to do. So we got involved in FFA because that's all there was. And FFA wasn't just about farming. They had public speaking contests, and you won't be surprised to hear that Hunt was good at that. They had parliamentary procedure contests and classes. I remember. He learned how to run a meeting, and that turned out to be a valuable thing later on. And I think that's really where he got a taste. It's sort of like...
I just have to interrupt you. This is so... Because I did all right in the parliamentary procedure and the handling of meetings. It was judging cows where I failed. I couldn't.
He was pretty good at that too, you know.
Governor Hunt was, and there was an impact on it. One of the stories you told was that he got his speech. This is something politicians have a hard time learning. He got his one speech and he did it over and over again, worked on it all his high school career.
Yeah, he worked on it all the time. He'd practice it on the tractor. He'd give it to his FFA advisor, who was a big influence on him. But basically, I think what happened is, you know, some great basketball players get discovered in high school. People figure out that, well, he's good at basketball, and they go from there. Well, Hunt discovered pretty early on that he was good at speaking. He was good at running meetings. He was good at politics. He was a natural.
That was right. Now, Mr. Sheffield was one of his...
D.B. Sheffield.
One of his important people. Tell us real quickly about his parents. You told us that they were college graduates. What about religion in the Hunt household?
They were members of the Free Will Baptist Church, which was not as fundamentalist as it sounds. It was very much a belief in education. His father was a tough old bird. I mean, he was stubborn. He was a farmer, but he was a soil conservationist, worked with FDR's Soil Conservation Service. Very stubborn, hard-driving man, and you see that in Hunt. His mother was a teacher.
I love the story that you told in your book about the acquisition of the farm in Wilson County, that Hunt's daddy advertised that he wanted to buy the worst piece of land.
The sorriest piece of land. And he was cheap. He was very frugal. One of his grandchildren said when he would give them gum, he wouldn't give them a separate stick of gum. He'd take one stick of gum and break it into separate pieces, and they all had to chew that. But he was a very tough and demanding person. The governor's mother was very different. People describe her as saintly. She was a teacher. She was actually the first woman appointed to the State Board of Health by Car Scott. She was a big supporter of not just Car Scott, but Frank Porter Graham. And Hunt, you can see both of his parents in Hunt even today.
Wow. Well, I'd love to talk more about this. One of the other important earlier influences on Governor Hunt apparently was his time at North Carolina State University. And can you talk a little bit about what happened to him there that kept him in the direction of politics or set him in that direction?
Well, he organized a machine, a political machine. He and a bunch of the boys in the ag school developed this political organization. And just one after another, they elected student body presidents and student government presidents. But I think in some respects, the most important thing that happened to Hunt is his views about race changed. He grew up in the 50s. And segregation was a part of life in North Carolina, and especially in rural North Carolina. And he acknowledges that he just sort of accepted that. His parents weren't racist; they were progressive. But, you know, integration was not something that people talked about. And then Hunt gets to college about 1956. He says he very quickly realizes, hearing from professors, Allard Lowenstein, people like that, well, that's just wrong. And you mentioned earlier religion. He did come up in a religious background, and one of the things that Hunt realized pretty early is if God teaches us that we're all equal, then there's no way we can justify the way we treat black people. And that was a huge change for somebody of his time and generation, and I think it's hard for us now to accept how big a change that was more than 50 years ago.
As we look at young student politicians today, we pick those out that whom we think will someday be elected, and usually we say that boy or that girl is going to be governor someday. When did this start happening to Jim Hunt?
Well, you know, the joke is that you can see it in his kindergarten class. He's the only one in the kindergarten picture in a coat and tie, you know. But people who went to college with him said that was sort of the story. We all thought, oh, he's going to be governor, he's going to be president. That he just sort of had that air about him. His professors said that you could tell in class he just had a seriousness and a purpose about him that was rare among college students.
Did Governor Hunt himself share this? Did he have this ambition?
It's a matter of some dispute. One of
now you're his biographer and his close friend. What does he say?
He says no. His cousin Carl Henley said he remembered Hunt saying when he was 14 years old he was going to be governor someday. But both his wife and his brother, Robert, say that that's not something he talked about then, that clearly he developed an interest in politics. But they thought it was later on, actually later into the 60s, before he really decided, yeah, that's what I'm going to do with my life, as opposed to being a lawyer or something.
Why did Governor Hunt decide to be a lawyer?
He's told me it was a way of being able to make a living anywhere. That if you had a law degree, I mean, he was one of the most educated people you'll ever meet. He had an undergraduate degree in agricultural education, a master's in agricultural economics, and decided to have a law degree because he said, I can make a living. And plus, that's a natural thing, I think, for a person who has an interest in government, public policy.
I want to skip over just a little bit of the time, and in your book you describe these times so well, but
thank you.
After law school, the 1964 election proved to be a disappointment for Governor Hunt in terms of his candidate not winning. This would be Richardson Pryor, and it, as you point out, one of his few failures that you share with us is that he failed the bar exam. And so, in my mind, in reading your story, what happened next is so critical in forming who Jim Hunt was that I want you to tell us what you think.
Well, he did an odd thing. He decided, I'll go to Nepal for 2 years. And not just I'll go to Nepal. He got a job as an economic advisor working for the Ford Foundation. He had a family. He got married while he was in college. They had 2 young children, and they were actually inspired by the Peace Corps. But the Peace Corps wouldn't take married couples with children. So they found another way to go overseas. And he and his young family pick up, this was 1964, spend 2 years living in Nepal. And, you know, they saw poverty. He traveled around the country. He had to hike around. He worked with villagers, tried to teach them how to use fertilizer. And he got, what was interesting about that experience in such a small country is that he wasn't just sort of caught up in one little part of the government and the bureaucracy and the economy. His team, and it was an old professor of his, Quentin Lindsay, who headed up, were helping develop an economic development plan for an entire country. And so Hunt got a big view of economic development, and I think he also got a very welcoming view about the world and about globalization at a time before that was really on everybody's radar. So later, when he was governor in the 70s, and the economy was beginning to change, and the economy was growing more global, he didn't resist that. He saw the benefits of that, the advantages of it, and pushed North Carolina to take advantage of it. And I think that's one respect in which he had a huge impact on the course of the state.
It's extraordinary in many respects, this part of the Hunt story, in part, from my point of view as sort of a regular North Carolina politician, that the last thing you do if you're trying to work your way up the ladder in North Carolina politics is take 2 years off in some far away part of the world, half all the way around the world really, in the furthest part of the world, and this, to me, is a defining moment in his political career, because when he came back, he saw North Carolina as none of the rest of us would be able to see it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, he stayed in touch. You know, Phil Carlton again tells the story that Hunt had him cut all the under the dome columns out of the News and Observer and mail them to him so he could stay up with politics. But yeah, it's not a traditional political course, and it sort of told me that, in fact, he was not certain at the time what he was going to do, except it was clear he was going to come back to North Carolina and he was going to try in some way to make a difference. But, you know, as is typical with him, he doesn't do anything halfway. He comes back and he pretty quickly shoots to the top. I mean, that's a remarkable thing when you think about it, DG. He comes back here in 1966. He's been out of the country for 2 years, and 6 years later, he's elected lieutenant governor at the age of 35. That's a remarkable story.
You try to explain the forces that came together to make this possible, including the extraordinary dedication, effort, and ambition of this young man. There were several key people who helped make this possible, and I wonder if you can tell us how they fit into the story.
Well, I think the most important person is Burt Bennett, who's sort of an unknown giant in North Carolina politics. Burt Bennett was Terry Sanford's campaign manager in 1960. And after Sanford went out of office and Richardson Pryor lost, Bennett kept the old Sanford organization intact. They had that much confidence in Burt. And sort of the idea was, okay, we're going to come back one day. Well, Bennett actually spotted Hunt in 1960. Said, well, there's a comer. There's somebody with talent. And they stay in touch. And as Hunt moves up to the Young Democrats later in the 60s, active in the party, he goes to Burt and says, I'd like to run for something. And Burt basically adopts him, sort of his political godfather, and gives Hunt, I mean, Hunt had been building an organization really statewide. What Burt gave him was entree to the Sanford network. Burt would say, beginning in about 1970, well, go see so-and-so down in Shelby. Go see so-and-so down east. And then Burt would sort of test. He'd call they called them keys. So what do you think of the boy? And they were all pretty impressed. And so Burt sort of helped get that whole organization behind Hunt. And Hunt makes no bones about it. He, for all his drive, all his ability, all his contacts, he would not have gotten elected lieutenant governor and then governor 4 years later without the help of that Sanford-Bennett family.
Well, this is a miracle story of being elected lieutenant governor in 1972 and then being elected governor in 1976, serving 2 terms, persuading the legislature and the people to permit the second term. All of this is covered so nicely in your book. I'm going to resist talking about it because the most poignant part of your book comes in 1984 at the end of Governor Hunt's second term as governor when he decides to run for the U.S. Senate. And this is an extraordinary story for Hunt and for North Carolina. What happened?
Well, his story is really 3 parts. Rise, which we've talked about, fall, which is 84, and then, of course, later on, the comeback. But the fall was essentially the race against Jesse Helms, where we didn't do a good job. He wasn't a good candidate. The times were against us. Race was against us. A lot of things were against us. But the story Hunt told, and it made such an impression on me because he told it to me a number of times, and so I made it the prologue of the book, is how after this the campaign with Helms seemed like it went on for 20 years, but it was really for 2 years. And he just got battered. I mean, they just pounded him with negative ads. And on Election Day in 84, Hunt is campaigning down near Charlotte, sort of some blue-collar precincts, textile country. And he runs across this young woman. She's with her family. And he asks her for her vote. And she says, well, I'm sorry, Governor Hunt, we like you, but we're voting for the Christian, meaning Jesse Helms. Well, of course, that drove Hunt crazy because he was a Christian and had been all his life. And I think what happened at that moment was he realized not only may I lose this election to Jesse Helms, who represented everything that he detested, but I have failed to let people see who I truly am. And I think that was a very painful thing. It was clearly a very painful loss, but he came back.
Well, what did the governor do after the election? He was still in office. That must have just gone down the tubes?
He started the Centennial Campus
How
at
did
North
that-
Carolina State.
Tell us that story.
This
is, now I just put this in context, this is a guy who's been beaten up and beaten and really dismissed by the people of North
Right.
Carolina. But he's still governor, and in some respects you'd have to say this guy ought to know that he doesn't have the confidence of the people of North Carolina. He ought to just ride it out and go into the sunset. But what does Jim Hunt do?
Well, number one, he didn't lack for self-confidence, and his therapy was work. That's how he would deal with defeat. And so he came up with the idea. What happened is there was a lot of land that was going to come vacant at Dix Hospital. And the city of Raleigh and some developers wanted to buy it and to develop it, shopping centers and homes and all. And it hit Hunt, well, no, that's right near North Carolina State. And the university could use this land. It was sort of landlocked. And what we need is a big research campus. And I don't know where he got the idea. It may have been being done somewhere else. We said, we need a research campus that's not just for colleges and students and professors, but also for private companies and labs and scientists where they all work together. So he in effect decided that we're going to take this land from Dix Hospital and we're going to give it to NC State and rammed it through.
You know, this is extraordinary achievement. It also was just a terribly outlandish idea, both in terms of what it was to do and the idea that the governor in a democracy could give away the state's land like this. Didn't let it, I mean, he just figured out how to do it. How did he figure out how to do it?
Well, you know, the thing about Hunt was he never hesitated to use power. He understands how to use power. And what he figured out is he could do some of it by executive action. The Council of State is in charge of conveying land, so he just sort of sold the Council of State on it. He convinced Jim Graham, Commissioner of Agriculture, to go along with it.
Well, he gave him a little bit for the farmers market.
They got their farmers market, and NC State got a whole new campus, and today it's what it is, and it's will be the home of the Hunt Library.
Gary, we're almost through. It's hard to believe, and we're not nearly. Take us back to the decision making after the 8 years that Jim Hunt was out of office, that he decided not to run for something else, but that the running for governor, being governor, was something that was his calling again.
Well, of course, you got to understand, we'd run for governor twice, and that worked out good, and lost for Senate, so we figured we knew how to run for governor, you know. But I think over those 8 years, he had a couple of chances to run for Senate. He got involved in a lot of education. He got interested in early childhood education. I think he came to realize, particularly at the age he was, there's really not a future in the Senate. If I really want to make an impact, the best way I can do it is to be governor. And he thought, I was pretty good governor. We got a lot done. I think we could do a lot better. And in fact, he was a much better governor.
Let me ask you this as we close out. You look at North Carolina and look at Governor Hunt, and you see them intertwined, and you convince us that North Carolina wouldn't be as well off as it is if somebody else had been governor. But as you look around and look at the southern states, would North Carolina have been able to move into the current century if Jim Hunt hadn't been here, or was he absolutely key to North Carolina's
Well, that's really sort of the point of my book. Bill Friday had a great description of North Carolina in 1950. Said it was poor, rural, and segregated to the core. And part of this is, obviously, it's not just Hunt, it's a lot of people, but you know, Terry Sanford's election was a turning point, because Sanford nudged us in a different direction from where Alabama, Mississippi, South Carolina went. What Hunt did in the 70s, the 80s, and 90s would say, the economy's changing, the old mainstays are going, but that doesn't mean we're going to die. There's another world out there. There are other opportunities. There's biotechnology. There's, you know, microelectronics, computers. So he pushed the state in that direction. And you look around today and you see what's happened. You know, it had a huge impact.
Well, you describe, well, your book gives me the courage to ask this question. Was Jim Hunt a liberal?
He is socially liberal. He believes that government can make a difference for people and make lives better. But he is morally conservative. He has his growing up in the country, being a churchgoer all his life, he has a very strong sense of morality on things, for example, like crime, personal responsibility, spending money. So, you know, you couldn't say it at the time. You had to deny you're a liberal if you're running for office. But if you define liberal as being somebody who believes government can work to give people a fair chance in life, very much is.
The other word that's tossed around in North Carolina politics is populist. And you might have thought Governor Hunt started out as a populist, but before it was over, he was in league with all the big business people in North Carolina, in partnership with them, developing programs that real populists might criticize.
Yeah, and I think one of the secrets to his success, both politically and as governor, is he combined progressive goals in things like education and economic development, and harnessed the business community, a lot of them more conservative than he was, in support of that, both fundraising and campaigns and supporting him and getting it through. But one of the things he says is North Carolina was lucky, and a lot of it's because of the university system, that we have a cadre of business leaders who were progressive, who weren't just mossbacks, and he took advantage of that and harnessed it.
Well, probably that might be one of his most extraordinary achievements, but we've hardly scratched the surface. But Gary Pearce, thanks for all you've done, especially for putting this book together and sharing it with us and giving us a chance to talk to you about it today.
Thank you, DG.
Thanks so much to Gary Pearce for writing this great book about Governor Hunt and sharing it with us. Thanks to all y'all for listening. Hope that you'll join us again this same time on North Carolina Bookwatch, where we'll introduce you to another one of North Carolina's great authors. In the meantime, check out for more information about Gary Pearce and this new book, and about our other authors and their books on our webpage and on our blog. I'll see you next week.
Funding for North Carolina Bookwatch is made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC-TV, and by the Mary Duke Biddle Foundation, Quail Ridge Books and Music, and the North Carolina Humanities Council.
Podcasts on UNCTV.org are made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC-TV.